Hello, everyone. My name is Cody Fletcher. Um, Excited to talk to you today about Alan Moore's Top 10. This was written by Alan Moore and illustrated by Gene Ha and Xander Cannon and lettered by Todd Klein. Top 10 is published by DC Vertigo Comics, and the length is 365 pages. Um, Top 10 is not a true graphic novel. It is a limited run that was published and later compiled into a singular graphic novel. Um, and while Alan Moore and DC would go on to release more stories in the Top 10 universe later on, it was a very tight, limited run that's been compiled into a graphic novel. As far as the act breaks, the first act ends, and the second act begins on page 40. And the first act utilizes this well-established rookie cop trope in police procedurals and criminal storytelling, and the way that we get into the story is that we meet our rookie officer, whose science hero ability is she has a group of engineered toys that can do everything from fight for her to search out and track down different evidence. Anyway, but that is how we get into the story. And we have the typical hazing where she's partnered with her gruff partner who's recently lost someone to suicide. His name is Smacks. He becomes very important later on. Um, and she's kind of the emotional heart as we come into the story. On page 40, we see the transition from her proving herself into the bulk of the second act, which is really centered around these two themes of um, what does it mean to be human, and this idea that you fighting against evil is a losing battle. That ultimately, good people get old, they get worn down. That people continuously turn to evil, but it's a struggle to keep yourself safe. And the way that this is approached is that you see multiple character arcs with people dealing with the struggles of being a police officer, of dealing with violence, of seeing horrific things happening to people. Um, and you also have several investigations. Um, and so the third act um, begins on page 278. What's interesting is that the beginning of the third act does have a conclusion for one of the major story arcs that's occurred over the course of the story. The discovery that this group of famous superheroes, science heroes, are complete frauds, that all of their exploits were made up, and they're actually a pedophile ring. All of their sidekicks are they're essentially grooming them to be abused. It's connected to multiple other investigations in the second act. They catch a serial killer that is a former member of this group. The science heroes turn to alien pornography. But what's interesting about the third act is that it answers the question of what does it mean to be human, and addresses the theme of the fight always goes on. Like there is no winning the fight against evil. You just struggle and die, and then the next group of people take up the mantle and they struggle and die because we see. But that debarkation, that line of debarkation, is marked by the death of one of the officers that we've gotten to know. And then she is replaced by an AI. So it's a robot that's come in and immediately is hazed, and there's the immediate distress that comes with the new police officer in a precinct. But they immediately overcome that and show an incredible amount of empathy and ability to fit in and accomplish things. And so then you have the conclusion to this case, and then part of this conclusion is that you see this robot character help them to capture this ring of pedophiles. Um, while this is going on, you see our rookie character and her partner Smax connecting and bonding over the fact because the rookie character was injured in the fight where the previous officer was killed. And so you see, having gone from a very gruff exterior and not wanting to connect to opening up and taking care of of his partner's ailing father while she's in the hospital recovering. Um, Ultimately, to answer the question, what does it mean to be human? We have the three major plot points at the third act that do that. There's the addition of Joe Pye, and it's Pi, as in 3.145, whatever the number is the AI companion who demonstrates his value in helping to solve the case. You have Smax, the hard-nosed veteran, opening up to his heroically injured partner, and we see the chief of police questioning his humanity with regards to his gay partner, and how their relationship started when he was much younger. It was this question of, well, how is what we did any different given the age group? And having just dealt with a group of pedophiles, and the conclusion that he reaches in the comic is that because we love each other and because we're connected, that has to be enough. And so ultimately the question of what does it mean to be human is to care, is to have love, to have empathy. As far as the question of whose story is it, this is a story of a police precinct, a group of superhuman cops who are trying to fight crime without losing their minds. And the conflict in Act 2 reinforces this. We see a string of personal moments showing police officers struggling with their jobs. We see a Christian cop who spends the entire day with a man who is fused with another alien. And so they're literally, as they were transporting dimensions, they become bonded at the molecular level. So the man doesn't die instantly, but is dead. Like, there is no way that he can survive. And so this entire running arc for this comic, and what I would define as the second act, is this Christian hero dealing with the facing of death. The police chief, the captain for this particular division of detectives is a sentient dog who wears a robot suit and is human. But when he pulls his suit off, he's just a dog that walks around but can talk and is hyper intelligent. He starts to date a woman, and so he has to face the question of what is appropriate in a city with aliens and beings of interdimensional rights, and the judgments and the considerations of the people around him. We see another hero who has to deal with confront his relationship with his mother after she's forced to move in with him. And so all of this conflict, which is a little bit potentially maddening at a large level, or if you look at it, an individual piece can seem quite large. Looking at it at the whole, you see that this theme carries us through this conflict in the second act. The story has a very clear beginning that takes advantage of the rookie cop to pull the audience into this strange new world. The middle of the story could seem muddled if you look at any individual character or investigation, but if you look at it from a more macro perspective, it becomes much more clear. Again, dealing with these themes, the resolution itself could seem like a typical comic book continuation of a successful series, but I don't think so. I think the completion of another major investigation is meant to solidify this idea that the fight never stops, and we, the reader, are supposed to take solace in the character growth we see, and be saddened in this idea that they will continue to be beaten down and beaten down and beaten down, because there will always be people willing to do bad things. The best and most complete character arc comes from Detective Smax. He's a gruff and emotionally unavailable character who is physically invulnerable and is capable of punishing beams of energy that he can fire from his abdominal, his solar plexus. But because of his physical invulnerability, is perhaps less developed intellectually and is emotionally unavailable. He suffers from that, what I would consider a classic trope of, I'm invulnerable, but the people around me continue to die, therefore I'm emotionally scarred. You see him connect, open up, learn to sacrifice, and eventually become very close friends with his rookie partner as he looks after her mentally ill father, and eventually asks her to accompany him to a family funeral in his own dimension. The graphic novel establishes time and place very well. It seems to adhere to the standard Western ratio discussed in McLeod's treatise on comics, involving subject-to-subject action, action-to-action progression, and scene-to-scene progression. In my example of action-to-action progression, we see King Peacock, which is destroy the robot dinosaur that he's fighting with a single punch, reaching in and ripping out the actuator that you're seeing in the photograph. And this is a very clear example of, you see the wind-up, you see the impact where he rips it out, and you see the the person laying on the ground destroyed. In the scene-to-scene example, we see in this first screen grab, we see Detective Smacks. He's the large man in the white hair and black skin. You see his partner, the science toy wielding rookie, in the lower left hand part holding the box, and they're talking to a group of gods about the murder of one of their own, which turns out to be a part of their legend. In the next slide, we transition to the precinct doctor explaining to a unfortunate victim that he's contracted their version of AIDS, which is called STARS. And this is a particularly useful transition because this was discussed earlier. Or sorry, not STARS, storms. This was discussed earlier. And we open on this shot, and we see the doctor, and we see this terrifying thing, and we get this string of dialogue which expresses like how sorry he is, and then just in the next page you have you realize who she's talking to, and that she uses the acronym STORMS, and come to find out that their version of AIDS is an example of that scene to scene transition. And this last screen grab shows a transition from subject to subject. And in the first panel you see green-skinned woman. She's making kind of lurid looks, just kind of buxom, and this is the former alien starlet turned serial killer, and she's actually telepathically communicating to one of the male officers to try to convince him to let her escape. The second panel, we see a female officer come in and stop his hand, and it's almost a match cut to the previous panel, and then see her in her true form, because she's a shapeshifter, in her non-humanoid form, and you realize that was the thing that was talking to him and trying to convince him to escape. I think it was very interesting. This was a little bit harder. I felt like this was the most poignant use of this that I could find, because it's very clear connection there. It was a very interesting use of it. Every page does take advantage of the mini comic. The every page is a mini comic idea. I've included one example where we see the partner of a character showing up at her house. This partner is ultimately the character with the colorful body paint is the character that eventually dies as the ending of the second act. But the children are excited to greet her. They ask her to do tricks. She starts doing tricks, and then as they get ready to leave, the children start to shout, "Oh, she's doing the thing that she said she was going to do." And it's this very clear, like, we have the partner enter the home, we have an exchange, the children are excited, she's doing tricks for them, and then as they're preparing to leave, the children are wowed and dazzled by the trick that's been present. And the story flows very, very well. I mean, Alan Moore is there's a reason that Professor Mann reference to Alan Moore in the actual notes for the assignment as far as wanting to do an Alan Moore piece, but it's the entire novel moves on at a very brisk and steady clip, really moving us through each page with compelling and interesting moments. Some of the things that I love about it that I think are really fun are some of the small non sequitur panels that we see that involve the small everyday things that are a part of being superheroes in a superhero city. The screen grab that I'm referencing right now shows a group of kids burning ants on an anthill, which is very, very taboo now, but was kind of an accepted normal thing for kids to be participating in. And of course they're doing it with pyromancy. They've got fire coming out of their fingertips or lasers coming out of their eyes. And often this was used as either a way to set the stage for a scene, or as a way to end a page and kind of jump over to the next one, or as a scene transition. I would recommend this book to my classmates, given the iconic nature of the writer and really how potently he examines the very human side of being a superhero. I think this was something that Christopher Nolan tackled pretty succinctly in his Dark Knight trilogy. But I think that you see the very clear roots in this work of what would eventually morph into the modern approach to superhero movies before the Marvel universe kind of took over and started their mega franchise. Um, as far as recommending this to my friends, my non-classmates, I would also do the same thing because of the really fun and interesting commentary on superheroes. It's very tongue-in-cheek. It's very aware. Often you see what are clearly very meant to be homages to very iconic superheroes fluttering around in the background, or at one point what looks to be a Chinese deity of some kind is having his prayer beads stolen while he lays drunkenly on the sidewalk by a group of Smurfs. And what I think is probably my fun fact, I think this is what I'll end on, is that um, at one point, one of the characters, his mother is removed from her house because she has super mice. Super mice. Literally, the mice even have superpowers in this city. And the only way that you can deal with them is if you bring in super cats. And all of these mice and cats have very iconic little superhero outfits that are very reminiscent of popular superheroes in Marvel and the DC. And it becomes a running gag through multiple issues. And at one point, the mice bring in the Eternals, and so things escalate very quickly, and the entire and the house kind of gets trashed, and it ends in the mother of our one of our main protagonists, and the protagonist are arguing with the exterminator who owns the super cats about whether or not he even was hired to do the job. And what he says is like, well, they've gone back in time and they've rewritten the timeline and they've hidden their tracks. And the entire running joke is a clear, tongue-in-cheek homage to the crazy, over-the-top rebooting and changing of storylines that occurs in what many would consider mainstream comics or mainstream superhero comics, and it's just delightful.